3, 2, 1.
Good morning. Today is Wednesday, August 6th, 2025. This is the Arlington County Board of Equalization hearings. There are 4 members present. Mr. Hoffman is absent and 4 cases on the agenda. The first case is RPC 14048-012 at 4201 Wilson Boulevard. Mr. Harmon, you can start with your 8 minutes and tell us about this property, sir.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairwoman, members of the board. Rob, good morning. So this is 4201 Wilson. It's Ballston Exchange 1, right there in Ballston. Now, as of the date of value, this property was 27.3% vacant. As we know, that's right at the county's stabilized vacancy of 28%, so pretty close. Now, this is interesting. So it's right at the county's stabilized vacancy. It was right at that rate for most of 2024. Yet the property actually reported an NOI that is over $10.3 million lower than what the county has used to assess NOI on the assessment. Looking at the county's test page, you can see they created what they term a reconstructed 2024 column. That's column E1. It kind of pulls data from different sources and just kind of smashes it all together to get what they call a reconstructed column. Looking at this, we see curiously, the county did pull 2024 on the books rental income. They did not pull actual income received. If they had done that, you would have seen that 2024 had significant concessions. The county overlooked these concessions. In 2024, concessions were over $10.3 million. So the county in the reconstruction looked at what is the book value of this rent, but not the actual value. They disregarded concessions in this reconstructed column. The question is why? They hold this reconstructed column out to be, here's what the property is capable of achieving. But we know in order to get those rents, you have to give market concessions, primarily $10.3 million in 2024. Now, this is either, it's either at best a whoopsie daisy on the county's part, we just forgot to include them, or at worst, it's an intentional attempt to hide the 8 ball and show the board a purposefully misleading figure. Either way, this reconstructed column is just plain wrong. Ignoring concessions when the property has averaged $4.6 million in concessions over each of the past 4 years. The property had $10.3 million in 2024. And on the books, the property has another $13.8 million in concessions legally contracted going forward. This is not in accordance with generally accepted appraisal practice, which in turn means it's not in accordance with Virginia law. Now I'm going to share my screen. That we've seen this page. This is in the board book. This is the Appraisal Institute's textbook on appraisal practice, the Appraisal of Real Estate, 15th edition. Here's how it says to treat concessions. In summary, it says concessions must be considered. Essentially, it says those concessions are required to get the occupancy. They're required to get the rents. Therefore, they're part and parcel of the income stream. They have to be considered. In this case, the county has completely ignored concessions on the reconstruction and given only token consideration to concessions on columns E and F, which are the county's 2025 assessment for the property and then their test column. Again, this property's averaged $4.6 million in concessions each year over the past 4. It has another $13.8 million in concessions on the books as of January 1, 2025. Now, this is largely due to one lease. We've provided this lease to the county on multiple occasions. They do have copies of this lease in their possessions. They know the concession schedule for this tenant. It's in their possession, yet they've chosen to ignore it. This is in contrast to what the textbook says you're supposed to do. So essentially what the county has done is impute the benefit of this lease without the burden. This incentive was required in order to sign this tenant. These concessions are going to be there for the next several years going forward. The assessment, by contrast, looked at the leases that we've provided, shows $13.8 million in outstanding concessions. The assessment only imputes $36,000 in concessions. This is not even in the same ballpark. This is egregious. This isn't even 1% of what the property has incurred, and is even less than what the property will incur going forward. The revision moves concessions to 1.3 million, still just a fraction of the actual concessions in place that, again, the textbook states we must consider. This issue is made all the more worrisome because because the county had all this information in their possession at the time of making the assessment and at the time of the review. We've provided these leases. We hear time and again say this is hugely critical information for their assessments. Yet when we provide the information and it doesn't support the narrative, it's not considered. So it's one of those issues where you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. We provided this information. We show in writing that these concessions are going to continue going forward. It happened in the past. They need to be considered. Now, we did inspect this property twice with Mr. Peralta over the past 4 years, 2021 and again in 2023. He's well aware of the nature of this property and the concessions required. We also inspected a neighboring property a couple of years ago, last year or 2 years ago, where that owner made the quip that, oh, all the tenants are going to this building because they're buying the leases, buying tenants. So put that information together. He's hearing from other market owners that concessions are that's how they're getting occupancy. They're undercutting their rents via concession in order to get those occupancies. You have to consider that. The market's considering it. Why is the assessment not considering it? It's simply plain error to ignore concessions. And it's not in accordance with generally accepted appraisal practice. Now, why does all this matter? This matters because the county's assessments for 2024, when compared with sales of properties that sold in that year, the assessments were nearly double the sale price for those properties. So taking a step back and trying not to miss the forest for the trees here, we're trying to determine fair market value. Fair market value has been defined in Virginia as the price a property will trade at. The prices properties traded at in 2024 were 50%, half of what the county had assessed those properties at last year. The county accurately assessed a sale property exactly 0 times in 2024 and missed on 100% of fair market sales that occurred in that year. For 2025, the county did make an adjustment to their assessments. However, when we look at those 2025 assessments compared to those 2024 sales, they're still 43% higher than what the market has valued those same properties at. So I understand we're working within the county's model in these hearings, but we have to step back and look at what's the goal. The goal is to get fair market value. What is the market telling us about the relationship between fair market value and the assessments? It's saying fair market value is still 43% lower than the 2025 assessments. The cause of this discrepancy is exactly what we're seeing in this case. It's what we're seeing in all the cases. The county has failed to acknowledge the cost of signing leases. Going back to my example from last week, this is essentially booking sales for, if you're running Kohl's department store, you're booking sales at MSRP instead of the actual sale price. We know they discount everything at Kohl's. Same way, you're signing leases, you're giving concessions. Here, the county has ignored that. The county additionally looks at operating expenses based on not growing those. They're using unstabilized occupancy to impute operating expenses. And it uses a cap rate that's derived by one sale that wasn't a market sale.
Is that it?
Yes, that's all.
Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, Mr. Peralta for the county, please.
Thank you. Good morning. For this property, the board is aware that Boston Exchange 1, there's also a sister property somewhat connected to this subject property, Boston Exchange 2. Boston Exchange 2 did not appeal this year's assessment. Same year built, same effective age. So cap rate is similar to the subject property. And that was assessed for 2025 at $338 per square foot. The subject property is at $271 per square foot when considering the original assessment. When looking at the original assessment and comparing the leased office space, you'll see that column D and column G, the appellant's pro forma, is using similar market rents, $40.50 for the original assessment, and the appellant is using $40.41. Now, looking at the vacant square footage that the county originally had, the CoStar report that was printed and saved just as a point of reference, was printed out on November 20th, 2024. And that captured the 114,951 square feet vacant that the 2025 assessment shows or is assessing. That 114,951 square feet included 25,500 square feet of sublet space, an additional square feet of about the same for the co-working space. So that 114,951 had a total of 49,590 square feet that in hindsight shouldn't have been included as vacant square footage. When looking at the 2024 rent roll that was submitted in column E, the county did see that there was a number of different tenants that had leased space in the property. You'll see that it's all noted there on page 6 of 53. You'll see some items highlighted as far as the leases, lease dates are concerned. We did, however, in our test, match up, if you will, with the agent's total square footage vacant, 159,291 as a test. And, you know, even with that test, we did find that it's in support of the original value, original assessment. Now, taking a deeper dive into the different tenancies of the property, and with respect to the agent's point about concessions, if you turn to page 6, one of the major tenants that the appellant has pointed out as paying, or as the owner is paying large concessions, we did take that into account. You'll see on page 6, the coach lease has shown the 12-year lease rent schedule, and you'll see it it starts at $43.50 and upwards of $55.56. And when you take out take into consideration the abatements, we're coming at a net rent of $40.08. And so when we look at the original assessment, we did show that the coach tenant was at $40 a square feet to account for those abatements and those leases. In addition to that, what the agent didn't speak about is, due to our methodology and how we deduct the vacancy for this property. Originally, we had 23% vacant, again accounting for the 114,951 square feet vacant, where we had an additional 49,590 square feet that's sort of questionable as far as sublet space. But when you compare and look at what the methodology of the department is and what that effect is on the rents, you'll see that the office lease space at $40.50 minus the 28% vacancy deduction has a net lease that we assess the property at $29 a square feet $31 a square feet for that net rent after deducting 28%. And then when you take the coach lease, already including the abatements and concessions that we just looked at on page 6, and deduct another 28% from the $40, we're looking at $29 as the net rent. So when the county put on the guidelines saying we'll consider the concessions, with each subject property, that's what we're doing. We're looking at what the overall effect of our methodology and what that does to the net rent or to the face rent that we use for this property. And if you see in the reconstruction on E1, you'll see we took exactly what they reported in actual income. We didn't apply more rent, so to speak, for the coach tenant, the individual line item. We did break that out in our test to kind of show what the difference is in how much the coach tenant, because it's a large tenant in the property, how much they contributed as far as what the potential gross income is for this subject property. And you'll see that the difference there is if you compare line items, this is, sorry, in the office line item 1, and if you can go compare that columns E1 or E1 to F, you'll see that there's a difference there, and then the residual of that is that coach tenant. So even that the county in their test is projecting about 148,000 less than what they actually reported. So again, we are taking in consideration some of those leases and concessions, and then deducting another 28% beyond that $44 in our test. So in the end, we look at overall how this property has operated, and you compare that to the sister property. The sister property for 2024 is at 1% vacancy. This property here, we know that some tenancy is coming as the leases have been signed. And so we know that the outlook on this property is to improve. And we did try to take that in consideration as well. Looking at the rent roll for 2024, the average rents are $45.43 for office, and retail is at $61.23. We do see that CoStar asking rents at $47.50. So comparing those averages and looking at how we originally assessed the property and how we're testing the property, we do find support for our figures. In the end, looking at the test column, we do see that the overall value that is shown in the test column supports the original assessment. And so we do ask that the board confirm the original assessment. Thank you. Sorry, the microphone's off.
Oh, I'm sorry, thank you. Questions from board members? Comments, but Mr. Penaranda?
No, I don't have any.
Okay. All right, any final comments, Mr. Peralta?
I don't have anything to add. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Harmon, if you take a minute to wrap up then.
Yes, thank you. So the county states they've recognized concessions. How did they do that? Their net result is 1.6 million in concessions that they've recognized. Here's their analysis. What they've done is they've taken this Coke lease, they've used the rents out to year 12 of the lease. What they failed to do is finance 101. You have to discount those future leases, those future rents back to present value. The county's analysis would get an F in finance 101. If you're taking year 12 rents, you can't just take those at face value. You have to discount them back 12 years to today. We're valuing this property today. That will be an appropriate rent to use 12 years in the future. The property will be a different property. If we're using today's rents, you have to discount those. You have to discount year 12 by 12 years to get back to today, year 11 by 11 years, and so on. That's how you do a discounted cash flow, which is what the county's done half of. They didn't do the other half because it doesn't support their narrative. This property has $13.8 million in concessions on the books. The county's analysis results in recognition of 1.6 million. That is, thank you.
Thank you. All right, it's just among the board. I don't know where everybody is. I don't know. I look at this and I think it's difficult. We're comparing it to the sister property, but you know, the sister property is 1% vacant. This is 27% vacant. This is a tough one. I mean, I look at the numbers and I hear everything that Mr. Peralta is saying, but just look at the NOI, that's $10 million more than what was reported. I think it's pretty aggressive. But what's other folks think? Mr. Penaranda?
The only main difference I see is the pro forma that the appellant has really has. The only difference is the rates that they're using on the, to formulate that column. Overall, the rest is, the vacancy is still calculated at 28%. The expenses are a little higher than what the county has, which I think they're really high. So looking at overall, the way it's being assessed, I don't see any different than any other property that has come before us. And looking at the income and expense statements that the appellants provide, we're always providing just the actual numbers, not the gross potential income. So I'm okay with the county.
Okay. Mr. Yates?
Yeah, I hear what Jordan is saying concerning the concessions and discounting and so forth. I'm very pleased that when they created the spreadsheet, and they broke out the coach lease separately, which does take into concessions on that. But I don't think I'm not in complete agreement with the future value of money being factored in at this time. I just don't think, I'm fine with where the county is. Spot on.
All right. Okay. Mr. Mendez?
I would agree. I tried to run a couple tests, but I didn't see where I could move, so I would just stick with the county.
All right. Would somebody like to make a motion then?
Sure, I'll go ahead and move that we confirm the assessment. 162,632,300.
Okay, there's a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay. Mr. Mendez, all in favor?
All right.
Okay, and I'm opposed. Okay, so the county is confirmed at 162,632,300. Thank you. Moving along to the next case is RPC 140282020 at 909 North Taylor Street. Mr. Harmon, you can start with your 8 minutes on this property, sir.
Yes, thank you. So this is a 308,000 square foot office building. It was over 43% vacant as of the date of value. A big issue is that vacancy rate. It did increase from 9.7% 1 year prior to, again, over 43% as of the date of value. This is due to two tenants vacating. First, Amazon's lease for their ghost space that they weren't using did expire. We confirmed this on the inspection of the property in June of 2023. The space was vacant. The lease finally expired in 2024. So vacancy did increase. Second, MasterCard reduced their lease space by more than 58,000 square feet, or more than 44%. Between these two tenants reducing space, the property lost 122,000 square feet of occupied space and $6.2 million in pre-pandemic lease income that won't be achieved going forward. So those tenants reduced based on their pre-pandemic lease rates, 122,000 square feet, 6.2 million in annual income. Please keep that in mind as you're looking at the historical operating history of this property. Now, the current assessment for this property is $204 per square foot. This is an important data point. We can use this to compare the property's assessment, $204 a foot, to the actual fair market value of sister properties. We heard Mr. Peralta emphasize sister properties right next door to the property that we just heard. Well, this property's sister property, so this is 4250 Fairfax, directly next door, 4350 Fairfax. The sister property sold earlier this year for $102 a foot. That's exactly half of the current assessment for the subject property and less than half of the current assessment for that property. So the occupancy at both the subject and the sister property that sold were exactly the same. 43% vacant for the subject, 42% vacant for the sister property. In place rents at both properties are within 3% of each other. Both properties are of similar construction, similar quality. The sister property, again, is assessed at more than double its fair market value based on that market sale that was widely marketed, competitively bid. The subject property is also assessed at double that sale price of the sister property. Now, we heard the county again in the last case say sister property, sister property, sister property. I'll be curious to hear if they compare it to the sister property in this case. I would like to point out that the county did not provide our email response to questions on this property. They did request, we've heard them say these questions are crucial to the review. We did respond to that. We provided lease abstracts. We provided analysis of that sister property sale. That was not included in the board case by the county, unfortunately. Had it been, that email would show that the subject property is, again, very comparable to that sale comp next door. And the subject property has many leases with concessions that are spread throughout the term. So that's part of our argument that's recurring, is that concessions are not just at the front end. Oftentimes they're throughout the term. These leases showed that. The county did not include those in the board memo, unfortunately. The sale price of the neighboring property, while also in line, is also in line with other sales. So 4601 Fairfax Boulevard, less than 2 blocks away. It's basically across the intersection of Cleveland and Fairfax. That property also had about 40% vacancy at the time of sale. It sold in late 2023 for about $100 a foot also. So we have 2 sales, neighboring properties, sister properties at $100 a foot, similar occupancy, similar tenancy. Current assessments at $204 a foot. Traveling on east on Wilson, we see 4075 Wilson. That property sold in a market transaction in September of last year, $147 a foot, similar occupancy at sale. Going a little further down Wilson, 3865 Wilson sold in December of last year. So basically at the same time the county was creating the assessments for those properties. That property sold for $177 a foot. Part of that increase is due to better occupancy. It was 80% occupied at the time of sale. So we have all these sale comps in the neighborhood. We have the sister in the neighborhood showing sale values of $100 a foot, $100 a foot, 147, 177. The higher figures, of course, reflecting better occupancy. We have a current assessment of this property above and beyond any of those. We have market data of market sales telling us what fair market value is for these properties. Then we have the assessment at $204 a foot, well above any of those sales. So how does this happen? Again, it's the usual suspects. If you direct your attention to page 39 of the appeal, you'll see the summary of facts. First, the assessment does overstate NLA at the property by 9,300 square feet. Next, the assessment overstates occupied office by 15,500 square feet. That's okay. We understand the assessments made in fourth quarter. They don't have the perfect data, but on review, those corrections should be made. Then the assessment assumes operating expenses based on a largely vacant building and not on a stabilized occupancy. Keep in mind, this is not how the assessment calculates income. The assessment grows income to account for vacancy, but doesn't do the same for OpEx. So it's a logical fallacy to say, yes, we're going to have higher tenancy, paying rent, but those same tenants aren't going to be using any lights. They're not going to be flushing toilets. They're not going to need the trash empty. Those are ideal tenancies. Next, the assessment pulled the cap rate of 7.742% from one sale. We're well aware that one sale does not an assessment make. Not only is this cap rate derived from a single sale, that sale was an off-market transaction where the largest tenant was the purchaser of that building. So, we've provided sale analysis from sales in 2024 in the county. Those cap rates range from 9% to 22%. The base cap rate on this property is just 7.5%. As it stands, the assessment via the cap rate values this property as one of the best properties in Northern Virginia, despite the property having 43% vacancy in a market that has experienced negative net absorption over each of the past few years. Now, upon reviewing the appeal and all the data submitted with it, the county did 2 things, both of which are riddled with errors and completely ignore the leases we submitted that supported reduction. The county's reconstructed column, primarily on this one, it grosses up income to account for vacant space at the property, yet fails to take the corresponding deduction to account for market vacancy. So that's ghost income. That's income that will not be achieved. This results in the reconstruction overstating NOI by $3.3 million. When you analyze the increased vacancy at the property, we find that the 122,000 square feet in reduced occupancy results in $6.1 million less rent coming in going forward. Again, these assessments are forward-looking. They're projections. They're not relying on past data. That's useful to determine some of these forward projections, but the past projections include leases that don't exist, pre-pandemic leases that will not be replicated going forward. So the reconstruction is heavily reliant on that pre-pandemic occupancy and rental rates. We're looking forward. That's not going to be repeated. The county also did a test column. The test column corrects the overstating of NLA, but then it increases vacant office rents from $36 on the initial assessment to $40. That's not supported by the leases we provided to the county. The county on the test, also, the 2025 assessment in column D does misstate the vacant office rent also. That's an error. The test page says 3925. If you actually look at the assessment, they have the wrong square footage there. It's actually $36 a foot. So the county did, they corrected their NLA discrepancy, but then they increased rents and then they hid the 8 ball by showing 3925 instead of 36. They actually increased vacant office rent from 36 to 40. New leases support the previous value. CoStar data, lease data that was provided to the county do not support the $40 a foot. So I think that's why the error
Okay.
was made.
Mr. Harmon, I need you to wrap up.
Okay, that's just, been our experience on these, the request we provided. If it supports a reduction, it's not used. In this case,
Okay.
that's the case. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Mr. Peralta for the county, please.
Thank you. For this case, 4250 Fairfax Drive, it's similarly located as the first case in that Boston submarket. When looking at this property, you'll see the history of the property as the appellant has stated. Upwards of 10.9 in 2021 for NOI, 2023 10.7, and then we come to our original assessment, closer to 6.8. We do take into account all the things that the appellant has mentioned as far as the ghost lease and Amazon, and we looked at this property very intensely just to see what that effect did to this property. We did account for a major reduction from last year, this year, almost 44% decrease from last year. That equates to 50,712,400 in a reduction of assessment based on these changes that the county made. Looking at the original assessment and comparing it to what we did in the test, the major difference, Mr. Harmon is correct. We did use $36 a square feet in the original assessment. Now, looking at the newer leases that were signed on the property, we did make an upward adjustment for those vacant square footage rent rates. If you turn to page 7 of the rent roll, you'll see that the new 2024 leases that we had there on average had $46.13 per square foot. We're using $40 a square foot. The average for all the leases in place was $48.66. We're using in our test column $43 a square foot, the same square foot rate that the appellant is using. We do look at the rent roll that was submitted. For our determination, we came up with 307,507 square feet total. And that was an adjustment that we had from the original assessment. And the appellant seems to have 556 square feet more. Not sure where that's accounting or where that's coming from. But we do feel that, looking at the rent rolls, it was somewhat confusing, but then we are showing in the test column exactly what was shown in the 2024 rent roll. When looking at the overall NOIs of the original assessment and comparing it to the most recent NOI in the 2024 I&E column E, you'll see that the county is about 1.9 million shy of what they reported. And that's including or excluding the vacant portion of, that wasn't shown as potential gross for this property. And so if you compare columns E to E1, we did make that adjustment, adding in some figures there for the vacant square footage that was not reported. Mainly, it was just the vacant retail, and we actually used the agent's number in that figure, 139,572 for the vacant retail that wasn't accounted for. Even that shows support. If you look at the overall NOI of the column E and E1, again, the test and the original assessment is well below, almost 1.9 million below what the most recent NOI is showing. And then in addition to that, we're taking off below the line deductions to further show and compensate for those vacancies in the property. So with that, we do ask that the board confirm the original assessment at 64,835,200. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both. Questions from board members? No? All right, Mr. Peralta, any final comments in your last minute?
No, I don't. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Harmon, any final comments in your last minute?
Yes, thank you. So the county's analysis of those new leases on page 7, a couple of errors. It doesn't consider concessions at all. It's as if concessions don't exist. Now, we did provide that critical information to the county. They didn't include it in their memo. Had they done that, you would see one of those leases has the first 3 months of each lease year as free rent. So that's spread throughout the term. Comes out, those leases had 17% of the rent abated and 15%. That there's no consideration given. We've seen the textbook. The textbook says you must consider concessions. The county's analysis here doesn't even do half of the discounted cash flow analysis that they did in the last case. Now, considering concessions does bring these new leases in right around $38 a foot. The county, of course, increased rents to $40 a foot on their review. At most, those should be in $38 a foot, which is in line with what CoStar has advertised. It's just really, we need to find a way to get these concessions considered as it is required, and so far we haven't seen that. We've provided the information that the county says is critical, yet they disregard and misrepresent. Thank you.
All right,
And
thank you.
one of those leases was.
Okay, I'm sorry, your
2025
minute is up, sir. Thank you. Okay, it's just among the board. Or folks on this. Mr. Mendez.
Yeah, just looking at the summary page. I mean, it's easy to look at column D and column E and just say the NOI is much lower in column D on the original assessment than what was reported. But I really tried to look at the appellant's numbers. The appellant is in the pro forma. They're saying that they had a higher GPI than was actually reported, and they're saying they had a higher total amount of expenses. So, I mean, I really did my best to try to move things around here, but I go back to, I understand that the NLA is a little bit off in column D, but the NOI is just much lower than what was reported. So, and with a 43% drop this year, I'm okay with where things are.
Right, that's basically my thought as well. Mr. Yates or Mr. Penaranda?
Myself, like better the test column, but of course, we're not going to use anything. I think, the vacancy and concessions, it's been for years and years and years that the county has considered percentage and not necessarily each specific number as for each property. So, yeah, I'm totally okay with the concept. I think it's really a big deduction from last year, and I don't think they can ask for anything more.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Yeah,
Go
go
ahead.
ahead. It's
Yeah.
fine. That's fine.
All right, then I'm going to move to confirm the county at the 64,835,200. Do I have a second? Mr. Mendez, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, it's unanimous. The county's confirmed at 64,835,200. The next case is RPC 14046-025 at 4100 Fairfax Drive. Mr. Harmon, you can start with your 8 minutes on this property, sir.
Yes, thank you. So this property, 63,000 square foot office. It's at Fairfax and Randolph. This is the building with the Bronson Beer Hall on the ground floor. Now, the big issue when reviewing this property is how to treat the market knowledge that the largest tenant in the building, Cambridge, is vacating more than 90,000 square feet at the end of February of this year. Cambridge did sign a lease down the street at 950 North Glebe in October of 2023 to relocate to that building. This was well publicized at the time of signing that lease, It was market knowledge as of fourth quarter of 2023. We've included press reports, media reports to that effect. The county's memo for both of these properties actually mentioned that last year. For 950 Glebe, the property that they're moving to, the county's, hey, this property is improving. Look, they're moving here. Yet there's no acknowledgement that the property's leaving this property. So it's essentially assigning this tenant as occupying two properties at once. They do acknowledge the move, yet make no adjustment on the assessment. So if we're in the position, we're tasked with how would an investor value this property, knowing that a 90,000 square foot tenant has signed a lease elsewhere and has notified the owner that they're leaving. First, obviously this information is well known in the market and will take vacancy from 26% to 61%. Those are two completely different buildings in terms of profitability and investment. When you're looking at the historical NOI at this property reported, you have to factor out that Cambridge. That Cambridge lease goes back to 2003. Well before the pandemic, it's at above market rents. That is income that will not be repeated. So when looking at the assessment, the analysis does have to go a little further than the assessment's lower than the actual NOI. They're losing that huge tenant. Second, Cambridge, again, was paying rent based on a lease that goes to 2003. They were paying nearly $49 a foot. That's more than 10% more than the average of the rest of the office leases in place at the property before any concessions are considered. So we know that the property is about to see a huge spike in vacancy and a huge decrease in income. Unfortunately, the county's review, again, relies on entirely backward-looking financials instead of forward-looking projections. The county states that because the assessment's NOI is below that of 2024, it must be correct. This is incorrect. The income approach to value is by definition a forward-looking, prospective valuation approach. By making the entire review about backward-looking valuations, the assessment misses the mark and arrives at an assessed value of $240 a foot. Remember, the case that was just affirmed was at $204. All the sales that I mentioned in that case of similar occupancy buildings were $100 a foot, $147 a foot, and then a higher occupied building at $177. So assessment comps support lower values. Sale comps support lower values. The financials of the property going forward support a lower value. We should not be imputing it NOI and reviewing it based on income that's not there, income that's based on a 2003 lease. Our proposed value is $97. This is right in line with the sales comps nearby that are of similar occupancy, similar rental rates, similar vintage, similar quality buildings. Our analysis does consider that Cambridge is vacant. This is in line with how the county has valued other properties in the county when a large tenant is known to be vacated. The county has testified in prior years that when a large tenant's known to be vacating, what they'll do is they'll make adjustments below the line for them. And they've done that. The Ballston Exchange properties back in the mid 2010s when NSF was known to be vacating. 1320 Courthouse when Koch brothers were known to be vacating. 950 North Glebe, where the ATA was known to be vacating several years ago, the county did just that. They made large adjustments to the DFL to account for those tenants leaving, as it was known in the market. In those cases, the county did, again, reduce the rents to reflect the property's losing tenants that were paying above market rents. They increased the DFL to account for the cost of re-tenanting the vacant space, and the county's testified to that at prior hearings as well. That's what we've done in our analysis. We accounted for the fact that Cambridge will not be paying above market rent going forward. After removing Cambridge's above market rent and properly accounting for concessions at the property, the in-place rental rate for occupied office is just $40 a foot. This is consistent with what we see with new leases in the neighborhood, with in-place leases in the neighborhood, $40. For the vacant office rental rate, the assessment errs by relying on the above market rent of Cambridge to derive that rental rate for the vacant office space. As we saw in the prior case, the county, in that case, imputed vacant office rent at $36 a foot. Yet one block down the road, the county assumes $39 a foot. The most recent leases at this property, which were provided to the county, are at a net effective rental rate of only $35.62. This is what we've imputed. We used the most recent leases, $35.62 a foot. The property we just heard, the county used $36 a foot. How do they get to 39 a foot here? So we're faced with the same dilemma here again. We provide the relevant information. What the county has testified is hugely critical to their analysis. Yet it doesn't make it into the review if it supports a reduction. Now, this is not indicative of an objective review. When the county is reviewing the information, it's selective. Does it support the value? We'll use it. Does it support a reduction? We're not going to present it to the board. The most recent leases at this property again are at 35.62 a foot. The county used 36 a foot for a neighboring property. Yet for this one, they chose 39 a foot to maintain the assessment at that $240 a foot rate. Now, the next issue, the county does assume operating expenses will decrease at this property by 12.5% from what was reported just last year. This is what in appraisal parlance would be considered an extraordinary assumption. How do you assume operating expenses are going to decrease by 12.5% year over year? They're assessing it at the same income levels for occupancy, yet assuming operating expenses are actually going to decrease by 12.5% at a property that has consistently documented year over year increases in expenses, and in a market where we know the cost of labor and the cost of materials are increasing year over year. Yet the assessment says it's actually going to decrease. That's an extraordinary assumption. That's an unsupported assertion. The data show this property has averaged operating expense increases each of the past 3 years of about 9%. To this end, a potential purchaser would most certainly assume an increase in operating expenses on a going forward basis, not a 12% reduction as the assessment assumes. Next, the cap rate. We've mentioned this before. The assessment assumes a base cap rate of just 7.5%. This is below what any market sales that the county's own expert, Peter Korpax, utilized in his report. And it's well below what any of the surveys that the county states they use to develop cap rates show. As it stands, the cap rate is one of the lowest cap rates for the DC region. This property, given its age, location, and occupancy, is certainly average at best. Finally, again, we did account for Cambridge vacating with the appropriate below the line deductions to first account for the known vacant space to be released, and second to account for the amount of TIs required by the market for this type of space. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Mr. Peralta for the county, please.
Yes, thank you. For this property, looking at the history of the property, you'll see that in 2021 to 2023, you'll see the net operating income that was reported 7 million, 6.1, almost 6.5 million in 2023. And then in the most recent year, 6.7 million. The original assessment had an NOI of 5.9 million. Looking at the original assessment more in depth, we do see that we understated the overall net leasing area of the property. You'll see in columns E, F, and G that the increase there is due to the, I believe Jordan's mic is on, or due to the most recent rent roll. We didn't make the increase or actually show the increase in columns E, and then you'll see in column G the appellant has a different value than was reported in the 2024 rent roll, slightly more than what was reported in 2024 rent roll. Looking at the original assessment again, 112,233 square feet is what we found to be vacant in 2024 when we did the assessment. Looking at the actual printout of the CoStar report, we do see that 107,280 square feet was to become available on March 2025. So we didn't account for that as far as the square footage is concerned. And I'm not sure whether or not this is that huge tenant, but 107,280 is much more than what the 90,000 that the appellant has stated is moving to another property. And unfortunately, our methodology and our assessments, we do have to draw a line in the sand. As of 1/1, what was available as of the first of the year, and notating what I see in the COSTAR report, that space of 107,280 wasn't available till March of 2025. So 3 months well after the valuation date. So then looking at this and comparing what we found in the original assessment, $45.50, and looking at the rent roll, we do see that the leased averages were $46.59. And then with the office portion, and then retail was $46.37. Again, our original assessment is, our per square foot rates are below what I've just mentioned as the averages. Not sure exactly where the appellant is getting their numbers as far as per square foot rate for office. I do understand that he does feel that the concessions were not considered, but again, due to our methodology, the 4550 reduced by the 28% vacancy deduction gives a net rent of $32.76. So that's well below what the appellant feels is the base rent for the for the property in the lease space. And they're taking $39.79, which is lower than what we had in the original assessment, and then reducing it further by 28% using our methodology and sort of counting it twice in essence. The county does look at the overall effect of our methodology and how it affects the overall NOI. So in doing so, you'll see that there's pretty large disparity between what the original assessment's NOI is and how you compare that to the most recent 2024 INE. And looking at that original assessment again in column D, we are further reducing the valuation by 5.4 million in deductions below the line to account for that added square foot that is in excess of the 28% vacancy deduction. So again, like the previous cases, this case has an effective age of 2000. The original case, the first case had the same similar effective age, and thus has the same cap rate at 8.745. So we do feel that, and this actually is assessed slightly lower than that first case. First case was $277 a square feet, $271 a square feet, whereas here for this case we're at $239 a square feet. Again, accounting for all the vacancy and deductions that we had. One thing I'd like to add as well, we did overshoot or actually account for, sorry, packet seems a little out of order. Let me see. I'll just go ahead and rest for now. I believe we're open for questions, and we asked the board to confirm the original assessment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Questions from board members? No? All right, any final comments in your minute wrap up, Mr. Carlton?
No, that we didn't feel the need to test, given the original assessment was well supported with the current 2024 rent roll and what we originally had as far as the 2023 rent roll operating year. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Harmon, if you take 1 minute to wrap up, sir.
Yes, thank you. So we just heard the county again emphasize they're backwards. They're assessing this based on prior year's financials. That's not how the property was known to be existing on January 1st. It was well publicized 15 months before the date of value that the largest tenant was vacating. That means $4.4 million in income previously reported will not be achieved going forward. Even if they manage to backfill that space, it's not going to be at those rates. Those rates are based on an escalated 2003 contract. The income approach is forward-looking, perspective, not backwards-looking, which is all that we heard from the county. Backwards-looking, backwards-looking. Circumstances at this property have changed going forward. The county has accounted for this on other properties. They've testified as much at the board previously. By not doing it for this property, it's not equitable with other properties. Now, we did not hear the county state anything about how they expect operating expenses to decrease 12.5% going forward from what was incurred in 2024. There's simply no support for that assertion.
All right, thank you. Okay, it's just among the board. Where, folks?
Again,
Mr. Peralta, go ahead. Or I'm sorry, Mr. Penaranda.
I'm okay with the county on this one also. I think the numbers are shown again in favor of the balance. I don't see where I would make any adjustments.
Below the line, anything?
I think the below the line justifies the extra, vacancy that they have.
Right, I would agree. And I think it's difficult when the appellant says, oh, we're looking backwards, but that is what we do. We look backwards for a 3-year history. We're looking for trends. Okay, we do know that this tenant is leaving, but we've seen this before. We don't know, is it going to be replaced? And again, that Mr. Harmon does make the argument, it may not be at the same rate, but we'll cross that bridge when we get there. It's not at that point yet. So I think if anything, the assessment's a little low. Based on last year's performance, but I'm okay with the county. Anybody else different? Mr. Mendez?
I pretty much believe the same. I think it goes back to what Mr. Peralta said. We have to draw a line in the sand. January 1st is the data value. We've had cases like this before where the largest tenant is leaving in April, May. I understand February is at the beginning of the year. But I don't know if they paid rent in February, but they did still receive rent for January, February. They could extend. We don't know. So again, I would second what you guys said.
Okay. All right, then I'm going to move to confirm the county at the 62,111,400. Do I have a second?
Second that.
Mr. Penaranda, all in favor? Aye, opposed. Okay, it's unanimous. The county's confirmed at 62,111,400. And the last case on the agenda is RPC 19-002-2007. That's a misprint.
007.
007. It's a misprint on the agenda. 19-002-007 at 3100 Clarendon Boulevard. Mr. Harmon, you can start with your 8 minutes on this property, sir.
Yes, thank you. So this property has seen vacancy increase from 17% last year to 26% this year. That's due to 2 tenants leaving. Combined, these tenants were paying $1.6 million per year that will not be earned at the property going forward. So unlike the last case, these tenants are gone. So looking at the 3-year history, you need to correct for that for going forward income. In a market that has negative net absorption, that means more tenants are leaving than coming. We see appraisal after appraisal on properties, not assuming it's going to lease up right away. We do have to make adjustments for these pre-pandemic leases not being there anymore and the cost of re-tenanting at current market rents. Correcting the 2024 data for this, we see the assessment assumes an NOI that is well above what the property can expect to earn going forward. Now, on this case, it's the 4th case in a row. I hope the board is starting to notice a theme that information, the leases that we provide to the county are not used. If it supports a reduction, the county doesn't include it in the memo. The county doesn't consider them. Yet we're told this is critical pieces of information. We've heard them testify. If they don't get all of the information, they cannot review it. Yet when we provide the leases that support lower rates, lower assessments, they're not included in the memo. They're not used. This is unfortunately what we're seeing in case after case after case. It's what we see for this property. Now, the 4th property in a row where we've provided current leases to the county that unfortunately are not used in their final analysis. This is unfortunate because it does illustrate that the county is not conducting an impartial, objective review of these appeals. This is exactly how we get to where we are today, where the county rep comes in week after week, property after property, and testifies that after reviewing the latest, more current data each property, his assessments are actually too low and should have been higher. We've seen this case after case. The reviews come in 102%, 103%, 107%. Somehow, every assessment upon incorporating new data that actually shows lower rental rates, the review results in a higher rate. How does this happen? It's because that market data is not being incorporated, neither the market data nor the property specific data that we provide. We can see this when we look outside of the walls of the world of assessments and we see what's actually happening in the world of office properties in Arlington County. Market sales are consistently and without exception coming in below the assessments on these properties. Sales are coming in 50% or more below the current assessment on those sale properties. Yet in the words of Drea, on those same properties, when we've heard them and they've reviewed them, their assessment should have been even higher. So instead of being double, they should have been 210%, 220% the sale value. We're trying to get that sale value. That's what we're attempting to capture. That's the fair market value. So, let's back out of the county's model. We get so sucked in sometimes we fail, I think, to realize what's happening in the market. The real world market investors are valuing these properties, these same properties, at 50% of what Drea is valuing them. For this property, you can see on page 10 of the appeal, we provided the county with 3 leases as requested. The first of these is Enterprise Knowledge, shows that tenant relocated at a lower rate. That tenant, the lease we provided, they're going from paying $49.20 a foot to paying only $44.50 a foot before concessions. Now compare this with the rent roll the county has put together on page 6 of the appeal. The county uses that old rate, $49.20. So this is a concrete example. We provided the new lease, $44.50. They said, no, that's lower. We're going to stick with the old one, $49.20. The question is why? If the county has the lease in place, why do they purposefully choose not to use it when it shows a reduction in rent? After concessions, of course, must be considered or provided, we see that this tenant has concessions occurring throughout the term of the lease. The effective rental rate is only $40, yet the county's rent roll uses $49.20. The other new lease from 2024 is shown on page 10. You can see this lease is at an effective rate of only $41.34 a foot. Combined, these 2 new leases are at an average rate of just $40.42 a foot. So how did the county incorporate this new critical information that was provided to them in their review? Well, you can see the county's test column that when provided with new leases showing a rental rate for new tenants at $40.42 a foot, they actually increased the vacant office rental rate from the initial assessment at $40 to $47 on the test. So we've got an initial assessment imputing vacant office at $40. We provide new leases that say, yes, that's the ballpark. It's $40.42. They take that data and they bump it to $47. How? How does that make any sense? When they're provided the most recent leasing activity at the property, how do they arrive at a rental rate that's 16% greater than those leases that they had in their possession to review? Now, going back to page 10, you can see the county did request an update on Industrious. Now, this is a major issue on this property. Industrious specifically asked for the rent terms, which we've provided year after year. Happy to provide those. We did again this year. You can see that I've outlined those on page 10. That lease is also, we did attach it by email. It didn't make it into the county's memo to the board. They also didn't incorporate the detail of that lease. Industrious, we've spoken about this many years, year after year. They're on a percent rent basis. They weren't paying any rent for several years when nobody was going into the office. In 2024, we provided this information to the county. Industrious paid on a percent rent basis, $18.31 per square foot. The county on the assessment and on the review, after having received this information showing $18.31 a foot, chose to ignore it and impute that space at $30. Now, again, if we're backing out of the assessment world and putting ourselves in the shoes of a potential investor, we've heard from the board that we're backwards looking. Okay, so let's look back to 2024. I want to buy this property. Industrious leases 40,000 square feet. They're on a percent rent basis. What can I anticipate them paying for 2025? Well, last year they paid $18.31 a foot. Maybe I grow it 3%, maybe 5%. I don't get to $30 a foot like the counties assume. That's a 64% increase year over year. If we're backwards looking, they paid $18 a square foot in rent in 2024, yet the counties used $30. This is again evidence we're simply not getting an objective review from the assessor's office. We've provided what they, in their own words, call hugely critical information, but it's disregarded. So, we know the county didn't include the lease information, either the new leases or the industrious percent rent lease that we provided. The review also ignores any market growth and expenses at the property, instead assuming expenses will be exactly the same in 25 as they were in 24. The assessment's cap rate is an unloaded 7.3%. I have not seen any data point in the past couple of years that supports that. It's simply not anywhere in the market. You can't see this in sales. You can't see it in surveys. You can't see it in the county's expert report. You can't hear it from investors. It simply does not exist in the market. Now, all this is to say, first, the burden of proof, as we're aware, is a preponderance of the evidence. That essentially means more likely than not. Second, we need to back up and not miss the forest for the trees here. An assessment review has to be more comprehensive than just looking to see what happened last year. Okay, that's good. Income's close, expenses are close. What can we do? We have to see where these are coming in compared to the market. They're coming in double the market. And this is why. Ignoring market data, ignoring property specific. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Peralta for the county, please.
Thank you. 3100 Clarendon Boulevard. This property was originally built in 1987 and then renovated to effective age of 2007. I think this property, as well as the other properties heard today, somewhat bracketed well, where you can
see. May I have
your
attention, please? There has been a fire emergency reported in the building. Please evacuate the building by the nearest exit. Do not use the elevators.
Okay, well, obviously going to pause here. This seems to be a problem. The three of you don't seem to be moving.
May I have your attention, please? May I have your attention, please? There has been a fire emergency reported in the building. Please evacuate the building by the nearest exit. Do not use the elevators.
Rosa, I would go ahead and pause for now. Mary, I think the option is to postpone the hearing if possible, or come back at a later time today when they're able to re-enter the building. Usually it's 20 to 30 minutes.
May I have your attention, please? There has been a fire emergency reported in the building. Please evacuate the building by the nearest exit. Do not use the elevators.
Why don't we do this? Since the agenda seems very light for next Wednesday, and Mr. Harmon, you are coming, would you be amenable to moving this case?
May I have your attention, please?
To next Wednesday?
May I have your attention, please?
Okay.
There has been a fire emergency reported in the building. Please evacuate the building by the nearest exit. Do not use the elevators.
Thank you.
Okay, and then
Be safe.
See, yeah, we'll see everybody next Tuesday, but yeah, go ahead and get out of the building and we'll make this case up on the 13th.
Thank you.
Thank you.
May I have your attention, please? May I have your attention, please?